At the airport, just minutes before my flight to Paris, my son patted my shoulder and smiled. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything's been taken care of." But in the security mirror above the check-in counter, I saw him crouch down and slip a thick envelope into my suitcase. I said nothing. Instead, I quietly moved that envelope into my daughter-in-law's handbag. 20 minutes later, at the security checkpoint, an officer pulled it out and asked, "Ma'am, can you explain what's inside this?" My son instantly went pale, and my daughter-in-law started screaming in the middle of the airport. "I'm so grateful you chose to spend your time here with me today. Tell me in the comments, what country or city are you joining from? Let's see how far this story travels." Just so you know, some details in this story are fictionalized to serve the narrative and the lesson inside it. Names and settings are coincidental, but the wisdom woven through every scene, that part is all yours to take. There are mornings that look like every other morning. Same terminal, same recycled airport air, same announcer's voice echoing off the tile floors of O'Hare. But something underneath feels different, charged. Like the moment before a thunderstorm when the sky is still perfectly blue and you are the only one who knows what is coming. October 15th was that kind of morning for me. I had been traveling through this airport for 40 years. I knew every checkpoint, every camera angle, every blind spot between the check-in counter and Terminal 5's International Departure Gate. That knowledge had never been more useful than it was that day. Julian and Chloe arrived at the curb, looking exactly like what they wanted to appear to be, a devoted son, and his sharp-dressed wife there to send off his aging father with warm smiles and the right amount of concern. Julian wore a charcoal coat I had given him 2 Christmases ago. Chloe carried her leather tote over one shoulder, phone already in hand, eyes scanning her screen before she had even finished saying good morning. "You've got everything right, Dad," Julian said, reaching for my rolling bag. "Let me help you with that. I've been packing my own luggage since before you were born," I told him, keeping my voice light. "I think I can manage." He laughed. That easy, practiced laugh of his. Chloe offered a polished smile and said something about the weather in Paris this time of year. I nodded along and pushed my bag toward the check-in counter. That was when it happened. I had stepped forward to hand my passport to the agent. In the wide, convex security mirror mounted above the counter, the kind airlines use to monitor the queue, I watched Julian crouch down behind my rolling bag. His right hand moved fast and deliberate, sliding into the outer zippered compartment. 10 seconds. Maybe less. Then he straightened up, smoothed his coat, and looked at his phone like nothing had happened. My chest did not tighten. My hands did not shake. I had been a businessman for 4 decades. I had sat across tables from men who lied to my face with perfect composure. I had learned early that the most dangerous thing you can do when you catch someone in the act is let them know you caught them. So I smiled at the check-in agent, collected my boarding pass, and turned back to Julian and Chloe. "All set," I said. I gave Julian a firm pat on the shoulder, the kind a father gives a son. I nodded to Chloe. Then I pulled my bag toward the crowded pre-security corridor, where the flow of passengers created a natural wall of bodies and motion. I had 30 seconds. Chloe's leather tote hung loosely from the handle of her own carry-on. The main zipper open a few inches. She was the kind of person who never fully zipped her bag because she was always reaching into it. A habit I had noticed years ago. I unzipped the outer compartment of my rolling bag, closed my fingers around the thick envelope Julian had placed there, and in one smooth motion, the kind that looks like nothing more than a man adjusting his luggage, I dropped it into Chloe's tote and kept walking. 30 seconds. The corridor swallowed me back into the crowd. At the security line, I approached a TSA supervisor, a broad-shouldered man with a calm, professional demeanor, and spoke quietly. "Sir, my name is Arthur Sterling. I filed a report with airport police yesterday evening regarding a concern that someone may have placed unauthorized materials in my luggage without my knowledge." I reached into my jacket pocket and produced a folded copy of the incident report time-stamped the night before. I'd like to request a thorough inspection of my bags at the checkpoint. The supervisor looked at the report, then at me. Yes, sir. We'll take care of that. They pulled our entire group aside at the checkpoint. My bags went through first. The scanner operator studied the screen, shifted the bag once, then waved it through without issue. The TSA agent looked at me. I spread my hands, nothing there. Just an old man's clean luggage. Then they moved to Chloe's tote. The moment the agent reached in and felt the envelope, Chloe's entire body changed. I was watching from 4 feet away, and I saw it happen in real time, that fractional second where her face slipped before she could reconstruct it. Her jaw went tight. Her eyes cut sideways to Julian so fast that if you blinked, you missed it. Ma'am, can you tell me what's in this envelope? That's not mine. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. I don't know how that got there. There must be some kind of mistake. Ma'am, I need you to step to the secondary screening area. The agent was already reaching for his radio. This is insane. Chloe's composure cracked, a hairline fracture spreading fast. Her voice climbed half a pitch. I'm a corporate attorney. I travel through this airport every other week. I have never… Chloe. Julian stepped toward her, his face draining of color. Just calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. She turned on him, and in that half second before she caught herself, her eyes said, everything you did, this, you absolute idiot. Then she looked back at the agent and straightened her shoulders, trying to find the professional footing that was sliding out from under her. I will cooperate fully, but I am telling you, whatever is in that envelope does not belong to me. A second agent was already moving toward Julian. Sir, we'll need to check your carry-on as well. Julian's mouth opened, closed. He looked at me for the first time since we'd been pulled aside. Really looked at me with the expression of a man realizing that the ground he was standing on was not solid. I looked back at him with the patient, mildly confused face of a 60-year-old man who had no earthly idea what was going on. The agent opened Julian's bag and worked through it methodically. When he reached the interior mesh pocket, he paused. He removed a small memory card in a clear plastic sleeve. He held it up and looked at Julian. Can you tell me what's on this? Julian's legs looked like they wanted to stop working. He grabbed the edge of the inspection table, and I watched the knuckles of his right hand go white against the metal surface. His mouth moved, but what came out was barely a coherent sentence, something about work files, something about video footage for a presentation. The agent did not look convinced. 2 airport police officers were already walking toward our group. Passengers in line behind us had gone quiet the way crowds do when something real starts to happen in a public place. A woman near the front of the line shifted to get a better view. Someone raised a phone. I turned to the TSA supervisor who had helped me. Officer, I said quietly, I want to thank you for taking this seriously. I hope it turns out to be nothing. I said it with the voice of a man who is genuinely hoping for the best. He nodded and told me I was free to proceed to my gate. I collected my carry-on. I put my jacket back on. I did not rush. I walked toward gate H14 at the pace of a man with time to spare, the sound of Chloe's raised voice and Julian's strained explanations fading behind me with every step. My flight to Paris was on time, and the game had only just begun. To understand why I moved through that airport like a man without a single troubled thought, you need to know what happened the night before in my study at the Lincoln Park house. Under the yellow light of the lamp I've had since Eleanor was alive, when I first held in my hands what my son had built to destroy me. I found the envelope at 11 o'clock at night. I checked my luggage the evening before every international trip, a habit left over from 30 years of deals made in cities where losing a document meant losing a contract. I unzipped the outer compartment of my rolling bag to tuck in my passport holder, and my fingers closed around something that did not belong there. Thick. Sealed. No label. I carried it to my desk and sat down in my chair. I opened it slowly. The photographs came out first. 12 of them printed on high-quality paper images of me in places I had never been with people I had never met, in situations that would have destroyed a lesser man's reputation overnight. They were convincing. Whoever made them understood light and angle and the specific way a candid photograph differs from a staged one. I set them aside one by one, my face close to each image. Then came the DNA report, a document formatted to look like it had been issued by a licensed laboratory, complete with a certification seal, a reference number, a printed signature. It claimed that a paternity test had been conducted and that the results were conclusive. The language was clinical and precise. I set it on top of the photographs. Last was the USB drive. Small black, the kind you can buy in any electronics store. I plugged it into my laptop and put on my reading glasses. He had prepared more than one copy. I had found the drive, but he had kept a second on his person. That was Julian's way, always a backup, always a contingency. In this case, the backup was the thing that undid him. The audio file was 4 minutes and 22 seconds long. It was my voice, unmistakably my voice, saying things I had never said. The cuts were skilled. A word lifted from one sentence, a phrase pulled from another, stitched together with enough ambient sound to smooth the seams. I listened to all 4 minutes and 22 seconds without moving. When it ended, I closed the laptop. I sat in that room for a long time. The house was completely still. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, and the sound of it faded like an exhale. Here is what I want you to understand about what I felt in that moment. I was not afraid. I have been afraid before, the kind of bone-deep fear that comes when you receive a diagnosis in a hospital room, or when you stand at a graveside in November. This was not that. What I felt sitting in that chair with those photographs spread across my desk was something older and heavier than fear. It was grief, the kind that does not announce itself loudly, the kind that settles into your chest like water into sand, quiet and total and permanent. Because those photographs, that fabricated report, that carefully assembled audio file, they did not come from a stranger. They came from Julian. My son. The boy I had carried on my shoulders through the 4th of July crowds on Michigan Avenue when he was 5 years old, laughing so hard he could barely hold on. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. In the back, behind a row of old contracts, was a plain white envelope. I had put it there in 1995, and I had never moved it. I took it out and set it beside Julian's envelope on the desk. 2 envelopes. 30 years apart. One built to destroy. One kept to protect a child who never asked to be caught in the middle of a truth he had no part in making. I looked at them both for a while. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Marcus Webb had been with me for 17 years. He was the only person alive who knew the full shape of what I had been planning for the past several months. The quiet preparations, the careful positioning, the things I had set in motion long before Julian had decided to set his own things in motion. He picked up on the second ring. Marcus, I said, tomorrow morning everything proceeds as planned, but I need you to be ready for an additional step. Which step, sir? His voice was the same as always, steady, unhurried. The one I told you I hoped we would never need. A pause. Short. Then, understood. I'll be ready. I set the phone down and sat for another moment in the quiet of the study. Then I stood, took Julian's envelope, and placed it in the outer compartment of my rolling bag, exactly where he had put it, zipped back up undisturbed. I wanted him to see me walk into that airport with it. I wanted him to feel certain. Before I turned off the lamp, I opened my phone and typed a message to a contact I had saved under only 2 initials. VC. Are you ready? I set the phone on the desk and began to close up the room. A minute later, the screen lit up with her reply. I did not read it right away. I already knew what it would say. I had known Vivian Cole for 20 years, and in 20 years she had never once answered that question any other way. I turned off the lamp and walked upstairs to get a few hours of sleep before the most important morning I'd had in a long time. While I was closing up the study and heading upstairs to bed, there was a man on the 18th floor of the Sterling Property Building who had not slept in 32 hours and had no intention of sleeping tonight. Marcus Webb had worked for me since he was 31 years old. In 17 years, I had never once seen him flustered. I had watched him manage boardroom crises, negotiate with people who came to the table carrying weapons-grade arrogance, and once calmly redirect a hostile shareholder meeting that was 20 minutes from becoming a legal disaster. He had the kind of stillness that most people spend a lifetime trying to manufacture. With Marcus, it was simply the way he was built. That night, he sat in front of 3 monitors in his corner office and worked. The left screen held a file he had been building for 8 months. A detailed log of Julian's financial activity, cross-referenced with private travel records, cash withdrawals, and a series of encrypted communications that a third-party forensic firm had helped him piece together. Julian had borrowed $50 million from a man named Vincent Drago, who ran a private investment company out of Las Vegas that was, to put it generously, not the kind of firm that sent polite collection notices. "You've been tracking this since April," his assistant had asked when Marcus first briefed her back in the spring. "Since February," Marcus had said. "But April is when I was sure." On the center screen was the document Marcus had spent the last 3 weeks preparing: a debt purchase agreement between Blackstone Advisory LLC and Vincent Drago's operation. Blackstone Advisory LLC was a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware, which under Delaware law allowed its true ownership to remain private. No one looking at Blackstone's public registration would find Arthur Sterling's name anywhere near it. What they would find was a clean, legitimate corporate entity with the legal authority to purchase and hold debt. Marcus picked up his phone and called Arthur at 11 that night. "Everything is in position," he said. "Drago's team confirmed this afternoon. They want out. Julian has missed 2 informal deadlines, and Drago doesn't want the liability of chasing a Sterling through the courts. They'll take $35 million for a $50 million note." "They'll take it tonight?" Arthur asked. His voice was steady, but Marcus had known him long enough to hear the weight underneath it. "They'll take it within the hour if we move." A pause, short. Then Arthur said, "Do it." "There's one more thing," Marcus said. "I want to be clear about the notification requirement. Under Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, we're not obligated to notify Julian of the transfer before the transaction closes. We notify him after. He'll wake up tomorrow morning as a man who owes $50 million to someone he has never heard of." "Good," Arthur said. "Let him open the envelope first. Then let him read the letter from Blackstone." "Understood." Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not from doubt, but from the particular weight of a moment that cannot be undone. "Sir, are you certain about all of this? Once the debt transfers, Julian will know someone is moving against him. He'll panic." "I know he will," Arthur said. "That's when people make mistakes, Marcus. Let him panic." Marcus ended the call and picked up his pen. The debt purchase agreement ran to 41 pages. Marcus had read every line 4 times. He signed on behalf of Blackstone Advisory LLC at 11:47 p.m. Dated it October 14th and scanned the executed copy to Drago's legal team. The confirmation came back at 12:19 in the morning. The transaction was complete. Blackstone Advisory LLC now held Julian Sterling's $50 million debt in its entirety. Marcus set down his pen and pressed both palms flat against the desk, breathing out slowly through his nose. He had worked on a lot of deals in his career. Most of them were about money or property or market position. This one was different. This one was about a father and a son, and what happens when the worst version of that story plays out. He opened a second window on his screen, Julian's surveillance file, the one he had been building quietly for the better part of a year. The photographs from Las Vegas. The cell tower data placing Julian at locations he had told his father he was nowhere near. The communication logs. And the entry that had made Marcus's stomach drop when he first found it 4 months ago, a payment of $38,000 from Julian's personal account to a digital media production company in Miami that specialized in, according to their now-deleted website, advanced content reconstruction services. Fabricated photographs, manipulated audio, the kind of work that cost real money and left almost no fingerprints. He planned this for a long time, Marcus had told Arthur when he delivered that finding. Arthur had looked at the report for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he had said very quietly, "I know, so did I." Marcus rolled his chair back and looked at the third monitor, a simple document, a single page. It was the outline of what he needed to do tomorrow at the airport. His role was small but precise: find Julian after the TSA situation resolved itself, get close enough to deliver exactly 8 words, and then walk away before Julian could think too clearly about what those words implied. He had practiced the delivery 3 times in his empty office that evening. The tone had to be right, urgent enough to be believed, measured enough not to seem planted. Marcus opened his phone and typed a message to the contact saved simply as VC. "Tomorrow starts. Are you ready?" He set the phone face down on the desk and stood to stretch his back. He walked to the window and looked down at the city. Chicago at 2 in the morning had a particular quality, the streets not empty exactly, but quieted. The usual noise dropped to something that felt almost like breath. His phone buzzed once against the desk. He picked it up and read her reply. Then he set it back down and for the first time all night smiled. He gathered his jacket, turned off 2 of the 3 monitors, and took one last look at the debt transfer confirmation on the center screen. $50 million. Transferred. Clean, legal, irreversible. Marcus Webb turned off the light and took the elevator down to the lobby, nodding to the overnight security guard on his way out. The guard, whose name was Gerald and who had worked the night shift here for 9 years, raised a hand in greeting. "Late night, Mr. Webb." "Early morning," Marcus said without breaking stride. "Big day tomorrow, Gerald, big day." The seat next to mine was empty the way I had specifically requested when I booked the flight 6 weeks ago. I had known even then that I would need the space not for luggage but for thinking. For the kind of thinking that requires no one looking at you. Chicago disappeared beneath the cloud cover 40 minutes after takeoff. I watched the city dissolve into gray and felt something in my shoulders loosen for the first time in days. A flight attendant came by with the beverage cart. "Coffee, sir, or perhaps something stronger?" "Coffee," I said. "Black, and leave the pot close if you don't mind." She smiled the way flight attendants smile, professionally warm, and moved on. I wrapped both hands around the cup and looked out at nothing. I have been traveling internationally since before commercial flights had individual screens. In the early years, I used every airborne hour for work, reading contracts, reviewing projections, filling legal pads with notes in my cramped handwriting that my old assistant used to call archaeological evidence. But somewhere in my 50s, I stopped doing that on long flights. I started just thinking. Some of my clearest thoughts have happened at 35,000 feet, with no phone signal and nowhere else to be. That morning, my clearest thoughts were about Julian, not about what he had done. I had spent enough mental energy on that already, and I would spend more in the days ahead. What I found myself returning to somewhere over the middle of Lake Michigan was a much earlier version of my son, one that existed before ambition and bad decisions had finished shaping him into the man who had crouched behind my luggage cart the morning before. He was 7 years old the summer I took him to see his first Cubs game at Wrigley Field. He spent the first 2 innings asking me to explain every rule, and I spent those same 2 innings realizing I had genuinely underestimated how many rules there were. By the 3rd inning, he had stopped asking and just started watching, his chin resting on the railing of our box seats, his small face completely absorbed. In the 7th inning, a ball came sailing into our section. Julian reached up for it on pure instinct and caught it. Bare-handed, which is not advisable, and his palm went bright red immediately. He looked at me with his eyes full of tears, his lip trembling, trying very hard not to cry in public, because he had recently decided that he was too old to cry in public. "Does it hurt?" I asked him. "No," he said fiercely, which was such an obvious lie that I had to press my mouth together to keep from laughing. "You can say yes," I told him. "Saying something hurts doesn't mean you can't handle it." He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it really hurts, Dad." "Good," I said. "That means you caught it for real." I had loved that boy. I want to be clear about that, not as a preface to something harder, but as the truth in itself. Whatever came after, whatever it became, I had loved him completely and without condition for a long time. That kind of love does not disappear when someone disappoints you. It just changes shape. It becomes something heavier and quieter and harder to put down. My phone buzzed on the tray table, airplane mode off for another few minutes, before we crossed into international airspace. A message from Marcus, Blackstone, confirmation attached. Transaction complete as of 12:19 a.m. Julian Sterling's debt is now held by Blackstone Advisory LLC. He will receive written notification at his home address today. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. $50 million. Julian had borrowed $50 million from a man like Vincent Drago, who had built a career on lending money to desperate people at terms that made certain they would stay desperate. My son had walked into that arrangement voluntarily with the specific intention of using the Sterling name as collateral betting, that his last name would protect him from consequences the way it had protected him from so many smaller things over the years. It had been a bitter thing to discover 8 months ago when Marcus had first laid the financial evidence in front of me. Not because I was shocked by Julian's recklessness, I had seen the signs of that for years. What had made my chest feel like it was being slowly compressed was the realization that Julian had never once considered asking me for help. He had gone to Drago. He had gone to casinos. He had gone apparently to a production company in Miami that manufactured lies. But he had not come to me. That was the part that sat the heaviest. I pulled the window shade halfway down and leaned my head back against the seat. The other person I thought about somewhere over the North Atlantic was Vivian. I had not seen her since the week before a Tuesday afternoon, when she had come to the house with a set of revised operational projections and stayed for dinner the way she sometimes did when the workday ran long. We had eaten at the kitchen table, which Eleanor had always preferred to the formal dining room, and Vivian had told me about a young architect she had hired for a new development project in the West Loop, a woman barely 30 years old who had designed something genuinely interesting. "You should see the rendering," Vivian had said, her eyes brightening in that particular way they did when she found something worth being excited about. "It looks like the building is growing up from the ground instead of being placed on it." "Send it to me," I had told her. "I already did. Tuesday morning. You haven't opened it yet." "I've been busy." "You are always busy," she had said with the particular tone of someone who is both mildly exasperated and genuinely fond. I smiled at the memory alone in my seat above the Atlantic. Vivienne Cole had come into my life 20 years ago as a 12-year-old girl, standing very straight at her parents' funeral, refusing to let herself fall apart in public. I had known her father, Thomas Cole, an architect I had worked with for nearly a decade, one of the most quietly brilliant men I had ever encountered in this industry. When Thomas and his wife died in a highway accident on a Tuesday in November, they left behind exactly one person, a daughter, who had Thomas's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and not a single living relative who was in a position to take her. I had not adopted Vivian out of obligation. I want to be precise about that. I adopted her because when I looked at that 12-year-old girl standing in the November cold, I saw something. I recognized someone who was going to figure out how to survive no matter what, and who deserved to not have to do it alone. She had never asked me about inheritance. Not once. Not when she turned 18, not when she joined the company at 24, not when she was promoted, not ever. In 10 years of working at Sterling Property, the subject had simply not come up, and I knew, with the certainty that comes from watching a person closely over many years, that this was not strategy. It was just how she was. My phone buzzed one final time before the flight attendant came by to ask us to switch to full airplane mode. An unknown number, a short message. Mr. Sterling, we know where you are. Your son has been asking about us. I read it once. Then I deleted it, closed my eyes, and thought about it very carefully. Drago's people. Rattling their cage one last time before the transfer notification made them irrelevant. Or someone Julian had hired to watch me to confirm I was actually on the plane, actually leaving, actually out of the way. Either way, the message told me something useful. Julian was moving faster than I had expected, which meant I had less margin for error than I had planned for. I pressed the call button for the flight attendant. "That coffee," I said when she appeared. "I'll take something stronger after all." She raised an eyebrow just slightly, and I found that I did not mind. "Long trip," I told her. "Paris usually is," she said, and went to get my drink. Marcus called me over the Atlantic at close to 4 in the afternoon Chicago time, which put it somewhere past 10 at night in Paris, though I had not yet landed. The connection was choppy at first, the way satellite calls get when you are over open water, but his voice came through clearly enough. "He's here," Marcus said. Julian walked into the building at 1:15, Chloe with him. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Go ahead." He came through the lobby like he owned the floor. Told the front desk he was there on behalf of the chairman Yu, and that he had an urgent matter requiring immediate access to the executive suite. He had a document. Authorization letter, your signature. It looked right, sir. Good enough that the lobby security called upstairs instead of turning him away. I closed my eyes for a moment, not from surprise but from the particular exhaustion that comes with being proven right about something you desperately wished you were wrong about. "What happened upstairs?" I asked. "He called an emergency leadership meeting," Marcus said. "Told the senior directors you were being held for questioning by federal investigators and that you had authorized him to assume interim operational control. He had paperwork for that too." The directors were shaken. 2 of them were ready to go along with it. And the transfer request, $8 million from the reserve fund. He submitted it through the internal system at 2:45 p.m. Standard form, your department code, countersigned by Chloe in her capacity as corporate counsel. Marcus paused. It went to Vivian's desk. I felt something shift in my chest, not relief exactly, but the specific satisfaction of watching a plan hold its shape under pressure. "Tell me what she did," I said. Marcus allowed himself a small sound that in 17 years I had come to recognize as the closest he ever got to a laugh. "She sent it back. Handwritten note on the routing slip. Denied. No valid authorization from the board of directors during chairman's absence. V. Cole." That was it. 4 words and her initial. Across the city, in the 42nd floor conference room of the building I had spent 30 years building, Julian Sterling picked up that routing slip and stared at the name written on it. Marcus told me later that the color drained out of Julian's face so fast that the senior director sitting next to him asked if he needed water. "Who is Vivian Cole?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking at the edges the way it used to when he was a teenager and things weren't going his way. "The room's most senior director, a man named Robert Calloway, who had been with the company for 14 years and had the particular composure of someone who had survived multiple recessions, cleared his throat carefully. "Miss Cole is the director of operations," Robert said. "She was formally designated by the chairman as acting operational authority during his international travel. The designation was filed with the board 3 weeks ago." Julian's jaw tightened so hard I imagine his back teeth ached. "3 weeks ago," he repeated. "Yes, sir." Chloe put her hand on Julian's arm, a quick, firm pressure that meant stop talking before you make this worse. She turned to Robert with a smile that probably cost her considerable effort to produce. "Thank you, Robert. We'll need a few minutes to review the documentation. She pulled Julian into the hallway, and the moment the conference room door clicked shut, Marcus positioned near the elevator bank under the pretext of reviewing floor plans with a junior associate heard every word. 3 weeks! Julian hissed, his voice low and furious. He set this up 3 weeks ago. He knew, Chloe. Keep your voice down, she said sharply. He knew we were coming. He had to have known. We don't know that, Chloe said, but her voice had lost some of its usual precision. It had developed a small, hard edge of uncertainty. He may have set up the designation as a standard precaution. He always designates someone when he travels internationally. Then why Cole? Why not someone we know? Why someone we've never even heard of? Chloe did not answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and typed something fast. Marcus assumed she was searching Vivian's name in the company directory. She's 32, Chloe said after a moment. Director of Operations mid-level. No listed equity stake, no mention in any succession documentation I've seen. Her voice steadied again as the analytical part of her brain reasserted control. She's a manager, Julian. A capable one, clearly, but a manager. She has operational authority, not ownership authority. She can block internal transfers, but she cannot stop us from presenting the board with a proper petition for interim governance. So we go around her, Julian said. We go around her, Chloe confirmed, but carefully and quietly. That evening, Marcus relayed all of this to me in a video call from my hotel room in Paris. I sat on the edge of the bed in my shirt and trousers jacket draped over the chair and listened to every detail. When he finished, I said, Chloe ran a search on Vivian. Yes, sir. Within 4 minutes of hearing the name. What will she find? Her employment record. Her operational credentials. Nothing that connects her to you personally, and nothing about the succession documents. Those are sealed in the corporate trust filing and require a court order to access. I nodded slowly. Good. Let Chloe believe what she wants to believe. I stood and walked to the window. Paris at night had a particular quality, warm and golden, and completely indifferent to the things people were doing inside their hotel rooms. Chloe is smart enough to be dangerous, I said, but she's not smart enough to know what she doesn't know. That's always been her vulnerability. And Julian, Marcus asked. I thought about my son standing in that hallway, voice cracking, asking why he had never heard of Vivian Cole. My chest ached in the way it had been aching for days, that quiet, persistent pain that does not announce itself loudly, but does not go away. Julian is frightened, I said. Frightened people move fast and make mistakes. Let him. Marcus signed off. I stayed at the window for a while longer, looking out at the city. Somewhere in Chicago, Chloe Sterling was at her desk running searches and building strategies and feeling still like the situation was manageable. That confidence was going to be her undoing, not because I planned it that way, but because it was simply the nature of confidence that is built on incomplete information. And on a table somewhere in the River North mailroom, a white envelope from Blackstone Advisory, LLC, was waiting to be delivered in the morning. The morning of October 16th arrived in Chicago, the way late autumn mornings do in that city, gray and flat and cold enough to remind you that winter is not making suggestions anymore. It is making promises. Marcus told me later that Julian found the envelope at 7:43 in the morning. He was standing at the kitchen counter in the River North apartment in his undershirt and suit trousers, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee, the other sorting through the small pile of mail that had accumulated while he was distracted with larger things. He almost set it aside, a plain white envelope with a Delaware return address, the kind that looks like a bill or a legal notice, the kind that people put at the bottom of the pile and deal with later. But the name Blackstone Advisory, LLC, was printed on the return address line. And Julian Sterling had learned in 30 years of watching his father do business that companies with names like that did not send letters about nothing. He set down his coffee mug and opened the envelope. I was not there to see his face when he read it, but I have imagined it many times since, and Marcus's account gathered from a source close to the building's front desk, who observed Julian's demeanor when he came downstairs, an hour later suggested that the reading did not go smoothly. The letter was 2 pages. The first page explained in the precise and bloodless language of corporate debt law that Blackstone Advisory, LLC, had acquired the full balance of his outstanding obligation, $50 million, from the previous creditor as of October 14th at 12:19 a.m. Effective immediately, all payments, communications, and inquiries regarding the debt were to be directed to Blackstone's legal representative, whose contact information was listed at the bottom. The second page outlined the repayment terms. They were notably identical to the original terms Julian had agreed to with Drago. Blackstone was not offering leniency. Blackstone was not threatening acceleration. Blackstone was simply, and this was somehow more unsettling than either of those options, doing nothing except making clear that it now owned him. Julian called Chloe into the kitchen. She read the letter standing at the counter, still in her robe, her hair not yet done, which was itself a small signal of how early and how urgently he had knocked on the bedroom door. When she finished, she set the letter down very carefully on the granite countertop. "When was this signed?" she asked. "October 14th. Julian said, his voice coming out tighter than he intended. "The night before the airport." Chloe looked at him. Her expression did not collapse. Chloe's expressions rarely collapsed, but something behind her eyes shifted the way a building shifts before it shows cracks. "Someone bought your debt the night before you tried to move against your father. That's what it says." "That is not a coincidence, Julian." Julian grabbed his phone and called Drago. The call connected on the third ring. Drago's voice was flat and businesslike, the voice of a man who had already closed this chapter in his own mind. "Yeah," Drago said. "You sold my note," Julian said. His hand was trembling slightly against the phone, not from cold. "You sold it without telling me." "I'm not required to tell you," Drago said. "You owe the money. Who you owe it to, that's my business decision, not yours." "Who bought it?" Julian demanded. "Who is Blackstone Advisory?" "I don't know. And I don't care," Drago said, and Julian could hear the absolute truth of that in his voice. Drago had taken $35 million cash in hand for a $50 million note from a borrower who had already missed 2 informal deadlines. To Drago, this was a good deal. "You want my advice? Call Blackstone's lawyer and figure out your payment plan. You're not my problem anymore." The line went dead. Julian lowered the phone. His face had gone the particular shade of gray that skin goes when the blood has rushed somewhere else, when the body is processing something the mind has not yet fully accepted. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest and looked at the letter again. "I'm going to find out who owns Blackstone," she said, with the crisp decisiveness that was her default mode when she was underneath it, genuinely rattled. "Delaware LLC registration is public. I can get the registered agent's name cross-reference." "Chloe!" Julian's voice came out rough. "Delaware allows anonymous ownership. You know that. The registered agent has to be disclosed," she said. "That's a starting point." She went to get her laptop. Julian stayed at the kitchen counter staring at the letter. He picked it up and read the date again. October 14th, 12:19 a.m. While he had been sleeping or trying to sleep in this apartment, running through the plan in his head for the 100th time, telling himself it was going to work, had been awake across the city finalizing a transaction that flipped the entire board. He turned the letter over as if the back might say something the front had not. It was blank. Chloe came back with her laptop open and worked for 6 minutes without speaking. Julian watched her face for information, the way he always did when his own thinking had hit a wall and hers was still moving. Her expression stayed controlled, but her jaw got progressively tighter with every search that returned nothing useful. "The registered agent is a law firm," she said finally. "Standard setup for anonymous LLCs. The firm represents hundreds of entities. There's no way to determine the actual owner without a court order or a subpoena, neither of which we are in a position to obtain. She closed the laptop harder than she needed to. Whoever set this up knew exactly how to stay invisible. My father set this up, Julian said. It came out flat, not a question. Chloe looked at him across the kitchen counter. For a moment, the two of them held something between them that was too heavy for either of them to put into words. The dawning recognition that the man they had been treating as the slower, older piece on the board had in fact been playing an entirely different game. We don't know that, Chloe said. But her voice had gone careful in a way that meant she absolutely believed it. Julian picked up his coffee mug. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway, grimacing at the temperature because he needed something to do with his hands. $50 million, he said. If this is him, if he's holding the note, then I don't just owe a creditor, I owe my father. And he knows every asset I have. He knows every account. He knows everything. Chloe shut her laptop with a click. Then we finish what we started, she said, her voice hardening back into something that resembled certainty. When we control the company, 50 million is nothing. We're not stopping now. Julian looked at her. Something moved across his face, not agreement exactly, but the absence of a better option. He straightened up, rolled his shoulders back, and picked up his phone. But that night, long after Chloe had gone to bed, Julian sat alone in the darkened living room with the Blackstone letter in his hand. He read the date one more time. October 14th, the night before the airport. And for the first time since this whole thing began, Julian Sterling felt something he had not expected to feel, not anger, not determination, but a cold and spreading dread, the kind that starts in your stomach and works its way outward until your fingertips go numb. Someone had known. Someone had moved first. And whoever that someone was, they were not finished. The Grand Palais des Congrès. On the morning of October 16th was everything an international real estate conference is supposed to be: polished floors, nameplate, coffee cups, men and women in expensive suits moving through the registration area with the focused energy of people who have somewhere important to be. I was one of them. That is the part people rarely understand about how these things work. The most effective moves in a long game are the ones that look like nothing at all. While Julian was tearing through the corporate directory in Chicago looking for information on Vivian Cole, I was shaking hands with a Danish developer named Erik Sorensen and discussing the commercial real estate outlook for the American Midwest. While Chloe was recalibrating her strategy over a cold mug of coffee in River North, I was standing at a podium in front of 240 industry professionals talking about sustainable construction practices with the unhurried confidence of a man who had absolutely nothing pressing on his mind. My phone was in my jacket pocket. It vibrated exactly twice during my keynote. I felt both pulses and finished my remarks without breaking stride. That evening, I sat in my suite at the Le Bristol with the windows open and the sounds of the 8th arrondissement drifting up from the street below, and I called Raymond Holt. Raymond had been my personal attorney for 22 years, a lean, deliberate man from Evanston, who spoke slowly on purpose and charged accordingly. He was the kind of lawyer who read every page of every document he touched, including the appendices, including the footnotes in the appendices. I trusted him completely, which is a thing I do not say about many people. Raymond, I said when he picked up, talk to me about Chloe. Marcus briefed me this afternoon, Raymond said. She's been in contact with 3 of the company's smaller commercial tenants, the ones whose lease agreements come up for renewal in the first quarter. She's offering them early buyout terms at below market rates, generating cash quickly. How far below market? 15 to 18% on the 2 I've confirmed. The 3rd I'm still verifying. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. She thinks she has the authority to do this. She's operating on the assumption that Julian's authorization letter, combined with her standing as corporate counsel, gives her transactional power. Raymond said. She's wrong, but she's wrong in a way that requires someone to tell her so in writing before she can be held accountable. Then let her complete the transactions, I said. Raymond paused. When he spoke again, his voice had the particular careful quality it gets when he is about to say something that matters. Arthur, if we let her close all 3 deals, the total discounted value will likely trigger the recovery threshold in Section 14.3. I know. You understand that once I send that letter, she will owe the company the full difference between what she sold for and fair market value. Given her personal assets, that number is going to hurt. Raymond. My voice came out quieter than I intended. She helped my son build a fabricated case to have me declared incompetent. She used her legal credentials to give that case credibility. She used her position in my company to try to strip me of everything I built. I stood up and walked to the window. Send the letter when the 3rd transaction closes. Understood, Raymond said. There's one more thing. The letter needs to come from me in my capacity as corporate general counsel, not as your personal attorney. That way it's a company action, not a personal one. Cleaner legally and harder for her to characterize as retaliation. Do it that way. And the other matter, Raymond asked. The one Marcus mentioned, the document storage at your Lincoln Park property. I had thought carefully about this part. The information Marcus was going to let slip about a so-called archive of surveillance files and recorded meetings stored at the house was not true. There was no such archive. What there was, however, was a set of 7 cameras installed throughout the property 2 weeks ago by a security contractor Marcus had vetted personally. Those cameras were real. The bait was not. Tell Marcus to move forward, Ava. He knows what to do and how to do it. I want no direct line between that information and anything that can be traced back to us. It goes through a contact of a contact. This was the step I had told Marcus I hoped we would never need: the bait, the false drive, the cameras already watching every room. I had built it as a last resort. Julian had made it a necessity. How long do you think before they act on it? Raymond asked. Chloe is smart enough to know that if the files exist, she cannot afford to leave them there, I said. She'll move within 24 hours of hearing about them. Probably less. Raymond made a sound of quiet acknowledgement. I'll have everything ready on my end. The moment they set foot in that house, we have them on breaking and entering, destruction of property, and depending on what they destroy, potentially obstruction. That's a serious criminal exposure, Arthur. I know what it is, I said. That's why I'm doing it this way and not another way. We said goodnight. I set the phone down and stood at the open window for a while, letting the October air come in. Paris smelled like bread and exhaust, and the particular mineral smell of old stone, which is a smell I had always found oddly comforting. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. She closed the 2nd deal an hour ago, he wrote. Working on the 3rd tomorrow morning. And sir, I've identified the contact. The information about the Lincoln Park files will reach Chloe's circle by end of day tomorrow. I typed back, good. Make sure the cameras have fresh batteries. I almost smiled at my own message. Almost. The truth was that nothing about any of this felt like winning. It felt like surgery, necessary, carefully planned, and deeply unpleasant. You do not celebrate when the procedure is over. You simply sit with the knowledge that it was the right thing to do and let that be enough. I ordered dinner from room service, ate at the desk, while reviewing conference notes, and went to bed at 10:30. I slept better than I had expected. 2 time zones west in a city going gray with autumn. A woman who believed she was still in control of the situation was closing her laptop and getting ready to make the worst mistake of her professional life. Chloe Sterling had been a corporate attorney for 8 years, and in those 8 years, she had developed the particular brand of confidence that comes from being the smartest person in most of the rooms she walked into. She closed the 3rd deal at 11:42 in the morning on October 17th. A commercial lease buyout in Streeterville, a building that generated steady income and would have under normal market conditions commanded a premium renewal. She sold the buyout rights for 18% below what the property was worth. She did it cleanly, quickly, and with the quiet satisfaction of someone executing a plan that was working exactly as designed. Her phone rang at 2:58 in the afternoon. The name on the screen was Raymond Holt, and that before she even answered sent a small current of unease through her chest. Raymond Holt was Arthur's personal attorney. He was also technically the company's general counsel. She had dealt with him twice in 3 years, and both times the conversations had been formal, precise, and completely devoid of warmth. "Chloe," he said without preamble, "I'm calling in my capacity as corporate general counsel to notify you of a contractual matter requiring your immediate attention." She straightened in her chair. "Go ahead." "The 3 lease buyout transactions you executed over the past 48 hours have been reviewed by the board." His voice was measured the way a man's voice gets when he has rehearsed what he is about to say and wants to make certain he says it correctly. "The board has determined that these transactions were executed without the required approval under Section 14(3) of the Corporate Operating Agreement. As the signing attorney of record on all 3 deals, you bear direct contractual liability for the pricing differential." Chloe's hand tightened on the phone. "What differential?" "The difference between the transaction prices and certified fair market value as determined by independent appraisal. The total figure is $12.4 million. He let that number sit in the air for exactly 1 second before continuing. "Under Section 14(3), you have 60 days to arrange restitution. I'm sending the formal notice to your office address and your personal address simultaneously. Raymond." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "I acted under the operational authority granted by a document that has been flagged as potentially fraudulent," Raymond said, cutting her off with quiet precision, "and countersigned by you in your capacity as corporate counsel, which creates an additional exposure under Illinois professional responsibility rules. I'd strongly recommend you retain independent legal representation before responding to this notice." A brief pause. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The line went dead. Chloe sat at her desk with her phone pressed against her palm, her jaw so tight her back teeth ached, her mind moving at a speed that was almost visible. $12.4 million in 60 days. From her personal assets, because the authorization she had relied on was now being called fraudulent, which meant the company would argue she had no transactional authority, which meant the liability was personal, which meant she called Julian. "Get over here," she said when he picked up. "Now." He arrived in 20 minutes, still in his coat, his face carrying the permanently strained expression he had been wearing since the Blackstone letter. He walked into her home office and looked at her sitting behind her desk, and whatever he saw in her face made him close the door without being asked. "What happened?" he said. "Section 14(3), she said. "Sit down." She explained it quickly and without softening anything. Julian sat in the chair across from her desk and listened, and she watched his face process the information in real time. The initial confusion, the dawning comprehension, the anger that followed, and then underneath the anger something that looked uncomfortably like panic. "He had that clause in the contract when I signed it," he said. "I signed the contract," Chloe said flatly. "I am corporate counsel. I signed my own appointment documents, and apparently—" She pulled up the file on her laptop and turned it toward him. "I signed a document with a 47-page appendix that I reviewed for the standard provisions and did not read to the end of." Julian stared at the screen. His face had gone the color of old concrete. $12,400,000 short of 12.5, she said. "Which I do not have in liquid assets and which you certainly do not have given your current financial situation." Julian pushed back from the desk and stood up, running both hands through his hair. "This is deliberate," he said, his voice climbing. "He put that clause in there for this exact situation. He knew. He's been setting this up for months, Chloe, the Blackstone thing, the Cole woman, and now this. I know, she said sharply, cutting through his spiral. I know that. Keep your voice down and let me think. She stood and walked to the window. Her hands were pressed flat against the glass, and she was aware in a distant way that they were trembling slightly, which infuriated her because her hands did not tremble. It was at that moment that her phone buzzed. A message from a colleague she occasionally shared information with a partner at a downtown firm who had his ear to the ground on most things that moved through Chicago's corporate legal community. Heard something interesting, the message read. Word is that Arthur Sterling keeps a full archive of internal surveillance files and recorded executive meetings at his Lincoln Park property. Physical drives, not cloud. If anything sensitive came up in the last year, it'd be there. Chloe read the message twice. Then she read it a third time, her eyes narrowing. She turned away from the window and looked at Julian. Something had shifted in her expression. The panic had not disappeared, but it had been pushed down, and something colder and more focused had taken its place. There's a way out of this, she said. Julian looked at her with the desperate hopefulness of a man drowning and spotting something that might be a rope. What are you talking about? His house, she said. Lincoln Park. I have a key copy I made 2 years ago when we were watching the property during his Nantucket trip. Julian gave me his copy for a week, and I never gave it back. He never noticed, or never said anything, if he did. She held Julian's gaze. There are files there. Physical drives. If he has surveillance footage, recorded meetings, anything that documents what he knows, and when he knew it, we need to get there first. Julian's face went through several expressions very quickly. You want to break into his house. I want to recover documentation that could be used against us. Chloe said, her voice crisp and clinical, as if she were advising a client rather than planning a crime. He's in Paris. The house is empty. We go in, we find the drives, we remove them. 2 hours maximum. Chloe, do you want to go to prison? Her voice was low and direct, the kind of voice that does not leave room for equivocation. Because that 12 million becomes the least of our problems if the wrong files end up in front of a federal prosecutor. Julian pressed his mouth into a thin line. His shoulders dropped by a fraction. When? He said. Tonight, she said. After 11. The street's quieter by then. He nodded, not with conviction, but with the resigned acknowledgement of someone who has run out of better options. What neither of them knew was that the information about the Lincoln Park archive had not arrived by accident. It had traveled through exactly 2 intermediaries before reaching Chloe's colleague, and Marcus Webb had started it moving 26 hours earlier on my specific instruction. And in the Lincoln Park property, they were planning to enter that night. 7 cameras with fresh batteries were already watching every room. Before I show you what those 7 cameras captured that night, drop a 7 in the comments right now. Just a single number. That's all I need to know you're still here with me. Because what Arthur saw on that screen at midnight from a hotel room in Paris, nobody saw coming. Not even me the first time I heard this story. And just so you know, parts of what follows have been shaped for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, this is a good place to step away. But if you're staying, you won't regret it. The 7 camera feeds had gone dark 17 minutes ago. I sat in the leather armchair by the window, my laptop balanced on my knee, the glow of the Parisian streetlights cutting pale gold strips across the carpet. My chest felt tight, not the kind of tight that sends men my age to the emergency room, but the kind that comes when you have watched your own son destroy something irreplaceable and could do nothing except let it happen. My throat burned. My eyes felt dry and raw the way they do after a long night of forcing yourself not to cry. I pressed the encrypted send button at 11:49 p.m. Paris time. 7 video files. Combined runtime 41 minutes and 18 seconds. Julian's face clear as a Tuesday morning. Chloe's voice sharp enough to cut glass. both of them standing in my study, smashing what they believed was the last copy of evidence that could bury them. They had no idea they had just built their own coffin nail by nail on camera. My phone buzzed within seconds. "Raymond," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Arthur." Raymond Holt's baritone came through with the familiar crispness of a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms and never once panicked. "I'm looking at the files right now. Give me 60 seconds. I heard him typing, the low hum of his office air conditioning in the background. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose and exhaled slowly. 60 seconds turned into 4 minutes. When Raymond came back on the line, his voice had shifted, quieter, more careful, the way he always sounded when he was holding something significant. "Arthur," he said, "this is clean. Crystal clean. Crystal clean. Camera angles are unobstructed. Timestamps are embedded, and tamper-evident audio is clear. I can hear Julian say, and I'm quoting directly, 'Smash the drive, Chloe, every piece, I don't care how long it takes.' That's consciousness of guilt. That's obstruction. That's a Class 1 felony residential burglary on top of it. Illinois takes home invasion seriously. Arthur, even when the home belongs to your own father." My hand tightened around the phone. Something moved in my chest, not relief, not yet, because relief felt too close to joy, and I wasn't ready for joy. "Can you move forward?" I asked. "I'm calling my contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office first thing tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Chicago time," Raymond said. "We'll file for an emergency preservation order on Sterling Properties' corporate accounts simultaneously. We don't want Julian liquidating anything before the indictment clock starts. The footage plus the Section 14.3 violation notice we sent yesterday gives us a strong dual-track civil and criminal running parallel." "What about Vivian?" I asked, and my voice caught slightly on her name in a way I hadn't expected. "Does any of this splash back on her?" "Not one drop," Raymond said firmly. "She refused the unauthorized transfer. She documented her objection through proper channels, and she has been in contact with me throughout. Vivian is clean, Arthur. She's not just clean, she's protected. Whatever happens in that boardroom on Monday, she walks in with credibility and walks out with authority." Something in my chest unknotted just barely. I pressed my free hand flat against my sternum as if I could physically slow my heartbeat. "Raymond," I said quietly. "Julian broke into my house. My house. The place where he grew up. Where his mother used to make Sunday dinners." Raymond didn't rush me. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry, Arthur. I genuinely am." "Don't be sorry," I said, and my jaw tightened. "Just be thorough." "Always am." I ended the call and set the phone on the armrest. The room was very still. Outside, Paris hummed with its indifferent midnight energy taxis, distant laughter, a church bell somewhere marking the hour with slow, resonant strokes that seemed to be counting something I had already lost. My laptop screen was still open to the camera dashboard. I clicked to the archived footage from camera 3, the one aimed directly at my mahogany desk, and let it play from the beginning. Julian entered the study at 1:17 a.m. Chicago time. He moved fast, shoulders hunched, a flashlight in one hand and a duffel bag in the other. He looked like a man running out of time because he was. His jaw was set, his eyes wide and darting, and there was something frantic in the way he moved. Not the controlled aggression I recognized from boardroom arguments, but something raw, something desperate. My throat tightened watching him. Because even now, even after everything, part of me still saw the 10-year-old boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder at Cubs games. The boy I had coached through his first business pitch at 16. The boy I had believed for 30 years was building something real alongside me. That boy was gone, and the man on the screen had made very deliberate choices to become someone I no longer recognized. Chloe appeared at 1:19 a.m. She moved with more precision than Julian, methodical, efficient, her voice low and clipped as she directed him toward the false drive mounted in the second desk drawer. I had placed it there myself 3 days ago, an old external hard drive wiped clean, with a convincingly worn label that read SP Archive 2019 to 2022. There, Chloe said on the footage, pointing. That has to be it. Marcus confirmed the filing dates. You sure? Julian's voice cracked slightly. I'm sure. Her tone was flat, decisive. Break it. Julian picked up the drive. His hands were not steady. I noticed that the tremor in his fingers as he raised it above his head and brought it down against the edge of the desk. The crack was loud even through the laptop speakers. My chest caved inward watching it. Not because of the drive was worthless, always had been, but because of the sheer reckless desperation in that single act. He had broken into his own father's home. He had smashed what he thought was the last barrier between him and everything he wanted. And in doing so, he had handed me every single thing I needed. Marcus, I said, switching to a text message, footage confirmed, delivered to Raymond. Phase 3 is a go. Maintain position. Marcus responded in under 30 seconds. Confirmed. Raymond's team is already pulling corporate account records. We're on schedule. I closed the laptop. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my wrist against them and held it there for a moment. Not because I was about to cry, I was well past the kind of grief that produces tears, but because the weight of the night had settled into my bones, and I needed one quiet second before tomorrow began. One quiet second, and then I reached for my phone, again pulled up a contact I hadn't called in 3 weeks, and let it ring. It picked up on the second ring. Dad. Vivian's voice came through the line, warm, alert, not the least bit sleepy despite the hour. Are you okay? My throat tightened so sharply I had to pause before answering. Not entirely, I said honestly, but I will be. I just needed to hear your voice. A brief weighted pause on her end. Then tell me everything. Vivienne had a gift for listening that most people spend a lifetime trying to cultivate and never quite manage. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fix things. She asked precise questions at the right moments, not to redirect the conversation, but to open it wider the way a good architect removes a wall to reveal the room that was always supposed to be there. Walk me through it from the beginning, she said. Not the legal part, the real part. I leaned back in the armchair, my eyes on the ceiling of the suite. The plasterwork up there was ornate scrolled leaves and small geometric diamonds, and I had spent enough sleepless nights in this room over the years to know every pattern by heart. The real part, I repeated. Yes, Dad, the part you're not going to put in a court filing. I exhaled long and slow and waited with things I hadn't said to anyone. Not to Raymond, not to Marcus, not even to the man in the mirror. I think I made him this way, I said. Not intentionally, but I gave Julian everything, every advantage, every opportunity, and I never made him earn the thing he wanted most, which was my trust. I handed him the company title. I handed him the salary. I handed him the name. My voice dropped. I never made him earn the name. Vivienne's breath on the other end of the line was steady and careful. You gave him what you thought a good father gives, she said quietly. I gave him what a guilty father gives, I said, and I surprised myself with how clearly the words came out, how long they had apparently been waiting behind my teeth. I was never home when he was small, Viv. I was in board meetings and on job sites and flying to Houston and back. His mother raised him mostly, and when she passed, I tried to compensate. I threw resources at the problem instead of time, money instead of presence. My jaw tightened hard. And here we are. Here we are, Vivian agreed softly, but without a trace of pity. But Dad, listen to me. You don't build a $50 million gambling debt because your father worked too hard. Julian made those choices. Chloe made those choices. They chose to go after your company, your home, your legacy. That's not your failure. That's their character. I pressed my free hand over my eyes. My chest ached, a deep structural ache, the kind that lives in the sternum and doesn't have anything to do with the heart muscle, and everything to do with the weight of decades. I know that, I said. I do know it. I stopped. Say it, she said. You don't have to protect me from it. I still love him, I said, and my voice cracked cleanly in two, right down the middle, the way old timber splits under pressure, not dramatically, but with a sound so final, you know the piece will never fit back together the same way. He is my son. Whatever the DNA says, whatever the court says, for 30 years, he was my son. And I am about to be the man who ends him, professionally, possibly criminally. I am going to walk into that shareholder meeting on Monday, and I am going to use everything I have built against everything he has tried to take. And I need you to know that I am not doing it lightly. The line was very quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone searching for words, but the specific quiet of someone who is feeling the full weight of what they've just heard and respecting it enough not to rush past it. I know you're not, Vivian said at last. That's why you're the right person to do it. I laughed short, rough, the sound more broken than amused. That's a generous reading. It's an accurate one. Her voice was firm. Dad, a man who didn't care, would have handed this to Raymond on day one and gone to Paris without a second thought. You've been up every night since October 15th watching camera feeds from 6,000 miles away. You called me at midnight because you needed to hear another human voice before you could sleep. That's not the behavior of someone who enjoys destroying people. That's someone carrying something enormous and still choosing to carry it correctly. My throat tightened so hard my eyes went hot and stinging. I pressed my fingers against the corner of my right eye. Not crying, not quite, but close enough that my body was making its displeasure known. When did you get wise? I asked roughly. I had a good teacher, she said, and I could hear the smile in it. We talked for another hour and a half. Not about the legal strategy, not about Monday's presentation, not about the shareholder vote, or the FBI referral, or the corporate restructuring plan that Raymond and Marcus had been quietly drafting for 6 weeks. We talked about the summer Vivian turned 14, and I drove her to her first architecture competition in Milwaukee. About the diner we stopped at on the way back, how she ordered pancakes with strawberries, and insisted on paying for mine with her own allowance money because she said, "You always pay for everything, Dad. Let me have this one." I had not thought about that afternoon in years. It came back now with the kind of clarity that hits you at midnight when your defenses are down the red vinyl booth, the sticky syrup jar, the way she counted out her dollars with absolute seriousness, and the way my chest had felt so full in that moment that I hadn't trusted myself to speak. It felt like that now again. Fuller than the grief, steadier than the anger. She had known since October 14th that something was coming. I had told her enough to be ready, not the full shape of it, not every move, but enough to know that when I called, she should answer. She always had. "Viv," I said around 2:40 a.m. Paris time, "Monday I need you in that room." A pause, then "I'll be there. Not as my daughter, as the person I am about to name Director of Restructuring and Interim CEO of Sterling Property. The board expects someone steady, someone the institutional investors will trust. The plan Raymond drafted names you." I exhaled slowly. "I need to know if you're ready for it." The pause this time was longer. I could hear her breathing. I imagined her standing up, pacing. She always paced when she was processing something significant, had done it since she was a teenager. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm ready." "It's going to be hard," I said. "The staff will ask questions. Some of the board members will push back. The press will—" "Dad!" Her voice cut through cleanly. "I said I'm ready. I didn't say it would be easy. Those are two different things." My mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite the opposite. "Yes," I said, "they are." I set the phone down at 3:07 a.m. The suite was dark, except for the streetlight coming under the curtains. My chest still ached, but differently now, less like a wound, and more like a muscle that had been worked very hard, and would given time grow stronger for it. I did not sleep immediately. I sat in the armchair for another 20 minutes, watching the light shift against the curtains, thinking about the architecture of the thing I had spent 6 months building. Not the legal structure, not the Blackstone play, not the camera network in the Lincoln Park house. The other architecture, the one that would outlast all of it. The foundation I had quietly, carefully been laying for a woman named Vivian Cole, who had paid for my pancakes with her own allowance money at 14, and would walk into a boardroom on Monday morning and change the course of everything. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Marcus. FBI contact confirmed receipt of Raymond's preliminary filing. Response expected within 48 hours. I read it once, turned the screen face down on the armrest. Tomorrow was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. The terminal at Charles de Gaulle was already loud at 8 in the morning, rolling luggage gate announcements in 3 languages. The smell of airport coffee that never quite tastes the way it smells. I moved through it all with the particular kind of stillness that settles over you when you have been awake most of the night, and your body has simply decided that exhaustion is no longer an option. Marcus had texted at 6:47 a.m. Paris time. Raymond's emergency preservation order was granted at 11 p.m. Chicago last night. Sterling Property corporate accounts are frozen pending investigation. Julian tried to wire $2.3 million to an offshore account at 10:52 p.m. The bank blocked it 9 minutes after the order went through. 9 minutes. I had read that text 4 times standing at the bathroom mirror, my face still damp from washing my shirt, not yet buttoned. 9 minutes between Julian draining the company and the wall going up. 9 minutes between everything and nothing. My hands had been steady when I read it. That surprised me. I boarded early, took my seat by the window in business class, and called Raymond before the cabin door closed. "Tell me about the 9 minutes," I said. The wire request originated from Julian's personal credentials on the Sterling Property Treasury portal, Raymond said. He sounded alert. He always sounded alert, which was one of the many reasons I had trusted this man with my legal affairs for 22 years. He was trying to move the money to an account in the Cayman Islands. Registered shell untraceable on the surface. But the preservation order flagged any outgoing transfer above $50,000. The system flagged it automatically. The bank's compliance officer manually blocked it within minutes. And now Julian has a paper trail showing he attempted to move company assets while under active legal scrutiny. Which adds what I asked. Wire fraud. Potentially. We're talking 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, that's federal Arthur. 5 to 20 years if the U.S. attorney decides to pursue it alongside the obstruction charge. A pause. He is not having a good weekend. I pressed my fingers to the corner of my eye. The pressure behind my temples was considerable but manageable. And Chloe, her attorney contacted my office at 7 a.m. this morning. She wants to negotiate. Raymond's voice was even revealing nothing. I told them we'd have a conversation after Monday's shareholder meeting, not before. Good, I said. Arthur? Raymond's tone shifted, dropped slightly. How are you doing? And I mean that as your attorney of 30 years and your friend, not as the man running your legal strategy. I looked out the window at the tarmac at the gray Paris morning, pressing down on everything. I'm going home to a house my son broke into, I said. I don't entirely know how I feel about that yet. Fair enough, Raymond said. Call me when you land. The flight was 9 hours and 40 minutes. I did not sleep. I did not watch the movie selections or eat more than half of the meal the flight attendant brought with genuine cheerfulness. I sat with my reading glasses on and a yellow legal pad on the tray table, and I wrote not strategy, not talking points for Monday, but a long, messy, honest accounting of the past 30 years that I knew I would never show another living person and would probably destroy when I got home. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the flight attendant, a woman named Patricia based on her name badge with the easy warmth of someone who genuinely liked her job, stopped by my row and refilled my water without being asked. Long flight, she said. Long week, I said. She smiled, the kind that understood without needing details. We land in about 3 hours. Can I get you anything? Tea, maybe? Tea would be good, I said. Thank you, Patricia. She brought it back in under 4 minutes. Earl Grey, hot, with a small container of honey on the side. I wrapped both hands around the cup and stared out at the clouds below the plane, that endless, anonymous white, and thought about what it meant to go home when home was no longer a place you were entirely sure of. My phone connected to Chicago Towers at 11:31 a.m. 4 messages arrived in rapid succession. One from Raymond confirming the FBI had formally opened a preliminary inquiry. One from Marcus confirming he'd be at arrivals. One from Vivian. I'll be at the house tonight. I made dinner. Don't argue with me about it. I read that last one twice. My chest did something complicated, a tightening and a loosening at the same time, like a fist slowly opening. I typed back, I wouldn't dream of it. Marcus was at arrivals, exactly where he said he'd be standing, with the particular composed efficiency that made him invaluable, dark coat phone already in hand, scanning the exit doors before I even cleared them. When he spotted me, he fell into step beside me without ceremony, which was exactly what I needed. Julian hasn't left his apartment since Friday night, Marcus said, as we moved toward the parking structure. We have eyes on the building. Chloe hasn't been back to the house since the break-in. She's at a hotel in River North, the Viceroy. Is she talking to anyone? I asked. Her attorney and her sister in Boston. That's it. Marcus pulled open the passenger door of the car. She hasn't contacted Julian since Saturday morning. Whatever's happening between them, they're not doing it over the phone. I settled into the passenger seat. The Chicago air through the parking structure was cold and sharp, the specific cold of a Midwest October that gets into your collar and reminds you winter is not a polite suggestion. Marcus, I said as he started the engine, thank you for all of it. The Blackstone timing, the surveillance coordination, keeping this contained. I know the past week has been a lot. Marcus glanced at me briefly, then back at the road. He was not a man who deflected compliments, but he was also not a man who made them larger than they needed to be. You built something worth protecting, Arthur, he said simply. That makes it straightforward. We drove the rest of the way to Lincoln Park without needing to fill the space. The front door had been repaired. Marcus had arranged it, a locksmith and a carpenter, both bonded and discreet, both finished before I landed. But I could still see where the frame had been forced, a faint seam in the new wood slightly lighter than the rest, the way a scar sits against older skin. I stood on the front step for a moment with my bag in my hand, just looking at that seam. You don't have to go in right now, Marcus said from behind me. Yes, I do, I said and pushed the door open. The foyer was fine. The living room was fine. The kitchen was fine. Whoever had done the repair work had cleaned up after themselves, which I appreciated more than I expected to. But when I reached the study, my study, the room where I had signed the original Sterling Property Incorporation papers 31 years ago, where I kept the first architectural rendering of our first completed building, framed on the wall where Eleanor's photograph still sat in the corner of the desk, the breath went out of me in a way I hadn't prepared for. The desk had a new gouge along the right edge where the wood had splintered. The drawer runner on the second drawer was bent. 3 books had been knocked from the shelf and replaced imprecisely, their spines slightly out of alignment, with the others in a way that most people wouldn't notice, and I couldn't stop noticing. Marcus said something from the doorway, but I held up one hand and he stopped. I walked to the desk slowly. I pulled out the chair, Eleanor's chair, the one she'd picked out 30 years ago from an antique dealer on Wells Street, and had reupholstered twice, and I sat down in it. My hands went flat on the desktop. The wood was still solid. The weight of it was still real. The photograph of Eleanor was exactly where I'd left it. They hadn't touched it. Something in my chest cracked open and then sealed itself before it could go any further, and I sat there with my hands on the desk and my jaw so tight it ached, and I breathed. The front door opened at 4:45 p.m. Vivienne Cole did not knock. She used the key I had given her 4 years ago, the one she kept on a small silver ring with no other keys on it, because she had told me when I gave it to her, "I'm not going to mix this with my regular keys, Dad. This one is different." She came through the study doorway carrying 2 paper bags from a grocery store. Her dark coat still on, her dark hair, pulled back with a few loose strands escaping at the temples, the way they always did. She was 32 years old, and she carried herself with the specific kind of quiet authority that you cannot manufacture, the kind that comes from knowing precisely who you are and having chosen it deliberately. She stopped when she saw me at the desk. Her eyes moved to the gouge in the wood, to the bent drawer, to my face. "Oh, Dad," she said, and her voice was not pitying. It was something warmer and more honest than pity, something that sat right at the edge of grief and held it steady. "I'm all right," I said immediately. "I know you are." She set the bags down on the coffee table and crossed the room and put her arms around me from behind, her chin resting briefly on the top of my head, the way she had done since she was 14 years old, and the height difference first started working in her favor. "I know you are. I'm just also allowed to say, 'Oh, Dad,' when I see a gouge in your favorite desk." Something in my throat tightened so hard my eyes went hot. I reached up and put my hand over hers on my shoulder. "Eleanor's chair is fine," I said roughly. "They didn't touch it." "Good," she said fiercely. "Good." She made dinner pasta with the specific garlic bread she had learned from a colleague's grandmother in graduate school and had been making for me on difficult occasions ever since. We ate at the kitchen table rather than the dining room, which was the right call without either of us having to say so, and we talked through the plan for Monday with the kind of efficiency that comes from 2 people who trust each other completely and don't need to dress the strategy in anything other than what it is. "The board presentation starts at 10, Vivienne said, winding pasta around her fork with focused precision. "Raymond's opening the session with the legal summary. Then I present the restructuring model 45 minutes. Then you speak." "Me," I said. She looked up. "You. The company was yours first, and the staff needs to see that this transition comes from strength, not from crisis. You walk in there as the founder, you introduce me as your chosen successor, and then you walk out. Clean. Clear." I studied her face across the table. She met my eyes without flinching, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, something that moved like pride, clean and uncomplicated. "When did you develop this plan?" I asked. "The day you called me from Paris and told me about Blackstone," she said simply. "I've had 3 days. I used them." I set down my fork. "Vivienne, there's something I need to say to you, and I need to say it tonight before Monday, when we're still just the 2 of us in this kitchen." She put her own fork down. Her dark eyes steadied on mine, attentive and unguarded. 20 years ago, I said, I stood at a graveside in November and watched a 12-year-old girl hold herself together with everything she had. Your father was one of the finest men I ever worked with. Your mother was the kind of woman a room remembered after she left. And you were standing there in the cold, completely alone, refusing to fall apart in public. My voice dropped. "I didn't take you home out of obligation, Vivienne. I took you home because I looked at you and saw someone who was going to figure out how to survive no matter what, and I could not walk away knowing you would have to do it alone." Her jaw had tightened slightly. Her eyes had gone very bright. "But taking you home," I said, "was never a mistake. Not for one single day." She pressed her lips together hard. Her hand came across the table and grabbed mine, and her grip was strong and fierce and trembling all at once. "You are not allowed to make me cry the night before the most important presentation of my career," she said, her voice unsteady and completely determined. I laughed a real laugh, the first one in days, rough and genuine. "My apologies." "No, you're not," she said, and she was smiling even as she reached up and pressed her fingers against the corner of her eye. "You're not sorry at all." "No," I agreed, "I'm not." We stayed at that table, until nearly 8 o'clock, long after the plates were cleared, talking about tomorrow and about everything that came before it. Vivienne had left at 8:30, kissing my cheek at the front door and saying, "Sleep before midnight if you can," which we both understood was not a realistic instruction, but a kind one. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, then closed the door and went directly to the study. The gouge in the desk was still there. I had decided I would not repair it. Some things should stay visible. I sat down, uncapped a pen, an old Mont Blanc Eleanor had given me the year we incorporated its barrel worn smooth in exactly the places my hand always found, and I pulled a fresh legal pad from the drawer. Not a laptop, not a prepared speech template. A pen and paper the way I had written every significant thing in my adult life, going all the way back to the original Sterling property business plan that I had drafted on a kitchen table in Wicker Park in 1994, with a cup of cold coffee at my elbow, and $38,000 in a savings account, and an absolute irrational certainty that I was about to build something that would last. My phone rang at 9:22 p.m. "Raymond," I said. "Last check-in before tomorrow," he said. "Everything is confirmed. The board has been formally notified. All 11 members acknowledged receipt of the emergency meeting notice. The U.S. Attorney's Office called my cell at 7 tonight. They're opening a formal grand jury investigation, Arthur. Wire fraud, obstruction of justice, attempted corporate asset theft. They're not announcing it publicly until they're ready to indict, but the machinery is moving." My pen stopped on this page. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the specific gravity of a thing becoming irreversible. "How long before they move?" I asked. "Weeks, not months," Raymond said. The wire transfer attempt was the cleanest thing Julian could have handed them. Combined with the camera footage and the Section 14.3 material, they have what they need. They're just building the formal record now. And Chloe's attorney still wants to negotiate. I still told them after Monday. A pause. "Arthur, I want to say something, and I need you to hear it as your friend rather than your counsel." "Go ahead. What you are doing tomorrow is not a betrayal," Raymond said, his voice deliberate and clear. "I know it feels like one. I know you have spent the past 5 days convincing yourself that a decent man should feel worse about this than you do. But Julian made 30 choices in a row that led to this room. You made one. You decided to protect what you built and the people who depend on it. Those are not morally equivalent." My throat tightened. I pressed the back of the pen against my bottom lip and stared at the framed architectural rendering on the wall, the original sketch of our first completed building, a 6-story mixed-use project in Pilsen, handeddered in pencil by a 26-year-old associate architect who had charged me $300 and become, over the following decade, one of my most trusted design partners. "I know," I said finally. "Good," Raymond said. "Get some sleep, Arthur. Tomorrow you walk in there as the man who built that company. Nothing more, nothing less." After I hung up, the study was very quiet. I looked at the legal pad, at the single line I had written, before the phone rang, what I want them to understand. I wrote for 2 hours. Not talking points. Not bullet points for a PowerPoint. A letter, long, specific, honest, addressed to no one in particular, and everyone at once. I wrote about 1994, about the kitchen table in Wicker Park, about the first deal that nearly broke us and the second one that saved us. I wrote about Eleanor, who had believed in the company before anyone else did, and had sat beside me through 12-hour closing nights with coffee, and the particular patience of a woman who understood that building something real takes time and unglamorous repetition. I wrote about Julian at 7 years old, sitting on a construction site in a yellow hard hat, 3 sizes too large, asking me with absolute seriousness, "Dad, how do you know if a building is going to last?" And I had told him, "You build it with materials that are honest, and you never cut corners where no one can see because the building knows." My hand slowed on that line. My eyes went hot and stinging. I pressed my fingers against my brow and held them there, breathing deliberately through the tightness in my chest. The building knows. I had tried to build my son the same way. I genuinely had. And I could not even now, sitting in the dark of my violated study with a gouge in my desk and a grand jury opening in a federal building 12 blocks away, I could not entirely let go of the belief that somewhere inside the man Julian had become, the boy in the yellow hard hat, still existed. But the boy in the yellow hard hat had not broken into this house. The boy in the yellow hard hat had not forged documents or attempted to wire $2 million out of a company that hundreds of people depended on for their livelihoods. I finished the letter at 11:31 p.m. I folded it in thirds, slid it into an envelope, and wrote Vivian's name on the front in my clearest handwriting. Not for tomorrow. For later, whenever later arrived. I set the Mont Blanc down on the desk and looked at the room around me, the rendering on the wall, Eleanor's photograph, the repaired doorframe, the honest gouge in the wood. All right, I said to no one to everything. Tomorrow then. The 42nd floor boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows on the north wall, and on a clear October morning, you could see all the way to Evanston, the city spread out below like a blueprint that had actually been built, which was the thing I had always loved most about this view. I had stood at this window perhaps 1,000 times in 31 years. I had never once taken it for granted. Marcus met me at the elevator at 9:44 a.m. He handed me a coffee without a word, which was exactly the correct thing to do. Everyone's inside, he said quietly as we walked the corridor. Board members all 11. Robert Calloway and the senior directors. Raymond's team set up the presentation screens. Media relations is on standby, but Raymond says we hold the external statement until after the vote. Julian, I asked. A brief pause. He arrived at 9:38. Chloe is with him. My jaw tightened. I kept walking. The room went noticeably still when I pushed through the glass doors. 11 board members around the long mahogany table, 6 senior directors along the side wall, Raymond's associate at the presentation screen. Robert Calloway, silver-haired and steady, met my eyes and gave me a single nod that carried the full weight of 30 years of professional trust. And at the far end of the table, Julian. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days because he hadn't. His face was drawn, his suit immaculate in the way of someone who uses clothes as armor when everything else is falling apart. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Beside him, Chloe sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap, her expression sealed so tightly it had stopped looking like composure and started looking like something held together with pure willpower. When Julian looked up and found my face across the room, something moved through his expression so fast I almost missed it. Not defiance, not guilt, but something raw. Something that looked for exactly 1 second like the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder at Wrigley Field. Then it was gone. I took my seat at the head of the table. Raymond stood and called the meeting to order. This is an emergency session of the Sterling Property Board of Directors, Raymond said, his voice carrying the full authority of a man who had stood in front of federal judges and never once blinked. Called pursuant to Article 9 of the Corporate Bylaws with quorum confirmed. The agenda has 2 parts, a legal and governance presentation and a vote on executive succession. We will proceed in that order. Raymond's presentation took 31 minutes. He was precise, methodical, and completely without cruelty. He laid out the facts the way a good architect lays out a structural report, clearly, completely, without editorializing. The forged power of attorney. The attempted $8 million reserve fund transfer. The Section 14.3 violation, and the $12.4 million liability notice. The break-in at my Lincoln Park residence on the night of October 17th. The camera footage which Raymond played on the presentation screens, without preamble, Julian's voice filling the room with devastating clarity. Smash the drive, Chloe. Every piece. The room did not make a sound during the footage. Julian's hands, which had been flat on the table, curled slowly into fists. His face had gone the color of old concrete. Beside him, I watched Chloe press her lips together so hard they went white at the edges, her eyes fixed on the screen, and I saw her jaw tremble just once before she locked it back into place. When the footage ended, Raymond said simply, "The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a formal grand jury investigation as of Saturday evening. We are not in a position to discuss further details of the federal matter. What the board is asked to act on today is the corporate governance question." One of the board members, Harriet Walsh, a sharp-minded woman who had been on the Sterling board for 14 years and had never once missed a meeting, leaned forward. "Julian," she said directly, "do you have anything to say to this board before we proceed to the vote?" The room turned. Julian raised his head. His jaw was working. His eyes, when they finally moved to mine across the length of the table, were red at the rims, not quite crying, but close enough that the effort of not crying was visible on every muscle of his face. He started. His voice cracked immediately, a clean break, and he stopped. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment and breathed. "I wanted what should have been mine." The words landed at the room like something dropped from a great height. "Julian." My voice came out steadier than I expected and quieter. "What was yours was always going to be yours. I never told you otherwise." "You were going to give it to her," he said, and his voice cracked again on the last word, raw and awful. "You were going to hand my company to someone who wasn't even—" "Don't," I said. The single word was not loud. It did not need to be. "Don't finish that sentence. Not here. Not in this room." His jaw clenched. His eyes were wet. Beside him, Chloe reached out and put her hand on his arm, but he pulled away from her, a sharp, involuntary motion, and she flinched like she'd been struck. Vivienne, who had been standing at the presentation screen, with the composed stillness of someone who has been preparing for this moment for weeks, stepped forward. "My name is Vivienne Cole," she said, addressing the board with a clarity that cut straight through the emotional wreckage in the room. "I hold a master's degree in real estate finance from Northwestern and have spent the past 8 years working in corporate restructuring. I am not here because of who my father is. I am here because I know what this company needs, and I have a plan to deliver it." She clicked to her first slide. "Let me show you." She spoke for 42 minutes. The board watched her with the focused attention of people who recognize competence when it is standing in front of them. When she finished, Harriet Walsh said, "I've seen a lot of succession presentations in 30 years. That was the best one." The vote was 9-2. Julian and Chloe did not vote. When the room began to empty, Julian stood slowly. His shoulders had dropped the armor of his suit, no longer doing the job he needed it to do. He moved toward the door without looking at me, and for a moment I thought he would simply leave, and part of me, the part that was still his father, would have let him. But he stopped at this door. His back was to me. His voice, when it came, was stripped of everything except exhaustion. "Did you know?" he said. "From the beginning, did you know what I was going to do?" I looked at the back of my son's head, the set of his shoulders, the particular way he held himself when he was trying not to break, and I felt something move through my chest like a wave that had traveled a very long distance to arrive here. "Yes," I said quietly. "I knew." He nodded once, a small broken motion, and then he walked out. Vivienne came to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She took my arm in both her hands, and we stood together at the window, looking out at the city I had helped build piece by piece for 31 years, and I breathed. The boardroom had emptied by 12:30. The last to leave was Harriet Walsh, 30 years on this board, and she still stayed to stack chairs. She paused at the glass door and looked at me with the directness that had always made her invaluable. "You did the right thing, Arthur," she said. "It wasn't easy, and it was still right." "Thank you, Harriet," I said. She nodded once and left. The click of the glass door behind her was the quietest sound I had heard all day, and somehow the loudest. I walked to my corner office at the end of the hall. 27 years in that room. Project binders going back to 1997. A north-facing window that had watched Chicago change in increments slow enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. I closed the door, sat behind the desk, put both hands flat on the surface, and breathed. The city outside was completely indifferent to what had just happened 42 floors above it. I found that oddly comforting. My phone rang at 1:14 p.m. "Raymond," I said. "She called." His voice carried the careful weight of a man delivering something he knows will land hard. Chloe's attorney contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office directly. She's requesting a cooperation agreement. My hand tightened on the phone. When? 12:58. 13 minutes after the board vote. A deliberate pause. She walked out of that boardroom and made the call from the elevator. "Arthur." She didn't wait 60 seconds. I pressed my free hand against my sternum. Something moved through my chest, not anger, not satisfaction, but something older and more complicated than either. Something that lived in the space between recognition and grief. "What does she have to offer?" I asked. "Quite a lot," Raymond said. "Recorded conversations between herself and Julian going back to April. The asset transfer plan, the forged authorization, and—" He paused. "The original intent to contest your mental competency if everything else failed." The words landed like something dropped from a considerable height. "She recorded him," I said. Not quite to Raymond, more to the room, to the afternoon light shifting gold to gray outside the window. All that time, she was recording him. "Whether that was foresight or fear," Raymond said carefully, "I genuinely cannot tell you. Possibly both." Marcus knocked and entered without waiting his signal for something requiring immediate attention. He held up 2 fingers. I nodded. "Raymond, I'll call you back," I said. "Keep me updated." "Of course, Arthur." "I know," I said. "I'm all right." I wasn't entirely sure that was true, but it was the best answer I had. Marcus settled into the chair across from my desk, with the composed efficiency of a man running on very little sleep, who had decided that was simply the current operating condition. "Julian left at 12:41, he said. "Different car service from his usual. Went directly to his River North apartment, hasn't left." A brief pause. "He didn't speak to anyone on his way out. Not security, not the lobby staff, not the elevator attendant who has known him for 6 years. Something caved inward in my chest at that. 6 years. My son had walked past a man who had greeted him by name for 6 years and said nothing. That told me more about Julian's state of mind than any surveillance report ever could. "The staff?" I asked. "Shaken," Marcus said honestly. "Some of them knew him before he joined the company. Today changed the image they carried of him. But they're professional, they'll hold." He met my eyes steadily. Vivian called every department head individually during the lunch hour. 11 calls, 40 minutes. By the time she finished, 3 of them had already emailed her restructuring concerns without being asked. 11 calls in 40 minutes, I said. Robert Calloway called her first. The corner of Marcus's mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough. Said he'd been waiting 2 years for someone to ask the right questions. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed through the fullness in my chest. The specific kind that arrives when grief and pride occupy the same space and refuse to take turns. "She's going to be extraordinary," I said quietly. "She already is," Marcus said. Simply. "The way you say something when it stopped being an opinion a long time ago." He left at 2. I worked through the afternoon, not crisis management, but the ordinary unglamorous work of transition project reports, contractor calls, and Vivian's restructuring timeline that Marcus had forwarded with the subject line. "She built this in 3 days. Thought you should see it. It was better than anything I would have built myself." Vivian appeared in my doorway at 4:47 p.m. carrying 2 coffees from the ground floor place the staff had been loyal to for 15 years. She had changed into a less formal jacket, more like the Vivian who showed up at my kitchen table with grocery bags than the one who had commanded a boardroom 4 hours ago. She handed me a cup, sat across from me, and we looked at the city through the north window. The October light was going long and amber, doing its best to be beautiful before it disappeared entirely. "How are you doing?" she asked. Not the polite version, the real one. "I feel like I won something I'm not sure I wanted to win," I said honestly. She nodded without rushing past it. "That's the right way to feel. It means you're being honest about the cost." Her dark eyes held steady on mine. "You protected 437 jobs today, Dad. You kept this company from being hollowed out by someone who saw it as a personal inheritance rather than a living thing. That's real. That matters." "I know," I said, "and it also cost me my son." "Yes," she said quietly without flinching. "Both things are true at once. You don't have to choose which one you're allowed to feel." My jaw tightened hard. My eyes went hot, and I pressed my thumb against the corner of my right eye and held it there. "When did you get this good at this?" I asked, rough-voiced. "October 15th, she said. "When you called me from Paris at midnight and trusted me with the truth." She reached across the desk and put her hand over mine, warm, steady, certain. "You showed me how. I'm just giving it back." Outside, the city held its shape against the fading light. I held my coffee with both hands and let that sit. Not alone. That made all the difference. I was home by 6:30. The Lincoln Park house had the particular stillness of a place that has been through something and is still deciding how to settle back into itself. I made tea, not coffee, not whiskey tea, which Eleanor had always insisted was the correct response to days that were too large for their containers, and I sat at the kitchen table with the mug in both hands and let the quiet in. Raymond called at 7:45 p.m. His voice had a texture I recognized, not alarm, but the particular weight of a man carrying information he has been processing for several hours before deciding how to deliver it. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has formally accepted Chloe's cooperation agreement," he said. "It was faster than I've seen in 20 years of federal work, which tells me the recordings she handed them are as significant as her attorney claimed." "How significant?" I asked. "Significant enough that the assistant U.S. attorney called my office personally at 4:30 to inform me as a courtesy that the cooperation agreement is in place and that Julian's indictment is being prepared." Raymond paused. "Arthur, the recordings go back to April 14th. That's the night of your 61st birthday dinner at Alinea. Julian and Chloe were recorded in the car on the way home discussing the full outline of what they intended to do. The mental competency filing, the asset transfer, the plan to use the Florida project documents to suggest financial mismanagement on your part." I set the mug down on the table. My hands were not shaking. They were very still, in fact, the way hands get when the rest of the body is absorbing something too large to process through ordinary physical responses. "April 14th, I said. "My birthday dinner." "Yes." I thought about that evening, the way Julian had ordered wine with the confidence of a man who believed he was entertaining a guest rather than dining with his father. The way Chloe had complimented my decision to wear the gray suit that Eleanor had always preferred. The warmth of it, the apparent ease of it. The entire evening had been a reconnaissance mission. "Arthur," Raymond said carefully, "how are you holding up?" "I'm trying to decide how I feel about Chloe," I said honestly. A pause. "That's an interesting answer." "She recorded him," I said. "From April onwards, she was building a record. That means, Raymond, that means at some point between April and October, something shifted for her. She stopped being his partner in this and started being someone covering herself. Or someone who was—" I stopped. "Someone who was afraid of him," Raymond said quietly. The words sat in the kitchen like something solid. "Yes," I said. I had not allowed myself to consider that possibility clearly before tonight. I had filed Chloe into the category of co-conspirator which was accurate. She had been for months, but it was not the complete picture. A woman who is recording her husband's criminal plans from the back seat of a car is not only a co-conspirator, she is also a woman calculating exits, a woman who knows how the game ends and is deciding which side of the door she wants to be on when it does. Her cooperation agreement will significantly reduce her exposure, Raymond said. The U.S. attorney is likely looking at a suspended sentence and community service given the quality of the evidence she provided. She'll be required to testify against Julian. And Julian, I asked, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, attempted corporate asset theft, and now with the April recordings, conspiracy to commit fraud. He is looking at a minimum of 7 years federal, Arthur. Likely more. 7 years. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen table and looked at the wood grain at the same table where Vivian and I had eaten pasta 12 hours ago, where Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast for 22 years, where Julian, at 15 years old, had sat across from me on a Sunday morning and told me he wanted to work in the company someday. I want to build things too, Dad. Like you. Raymond, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Does Julian know about Chloe's agreement? His attorney was notified at 5 p.m., Raymond said. Standard procedure. I thought about Julian in his River North apartment, receiving that notification. Learning that the woman who had sat beside him at the board meeting, who had been his partner in every plan, every scheme, every calculated move for the past 6 months, had handed him to the federal government in exchange for her own freedom. Something moved through my chest that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the specific cellular grief of watching a person discover they have been completely alone in something they thought they were doing together. I want you to do something for me, I said to Raymond. Outside of your legal capacity. Personal. Name it. Find out if Julian has anyone with him tonight. Family, a friend, anyone. Not to interfere, I won't contact him. I understand the legal situation. But I need to know he's not alone in that apartment. A beat of quiet on Raymond's end. Then I'll make some calls. Thank you, Arthur. Raymond's voice was very even. What you just asked me to do, asking whether the son who tried to destroy your company has someone with him tonight. That's not the behavior of a man who won something cold. You understand that, right? My eyes went hot. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose hard enough that I felt the cartilage. I'm still his father, I said. That doesn't stop because a federal grand jury opened. No, Raymond said. It doesn't. I stayed at the kitchen table after the call. The tea had gone cold. The house was very still around me, the particular stillness of October in Lincoln Park, where the trees were losing their leaves in quiet daily increments, and the neighborhood absorbed the change without comment. Raymond texted at 11:15 p.m. Julian's college friend, a man named Davis, arrived at the River North apartment at 8 p.m. He's still there. I read the text twice. Something in my chest released, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. I typed back, thank you. Then I went to the study, sat at the gouged desk, picked up the Mont Blanc pen, and wrote one more page that I knew I would never send. Not to Julian, not to Chloe, not to anyone. Just to Eleanor. Just to tell her what had happened the way I had told her everything for 34 years, until the morning I couldn't anymore. We're going to be all right, I wrote at the bottom of the last page. All of us in our different ways. Even him. I believed it. I folded the page and held it in both hands. For a long moment. My jaw tight. My eyes stinging with something that had been waiting all day for the right quiet. And then I set it down carefully on the desk beside Eleanor's photograph. Tomorrow, Vivian would walk into the office as interim CEO for the first time. Tomorrow was already almost here. 6 weeks is both a very long time and no time at all, depending on what you are measuring. In 6 weeks, Raymond had filed 3 supplementary briefs with the grand jury. The U.S. attorney issued a formal target letter to Julian's defense counsel, and 4 major institutional investors had renewed financing commitments that had been quietly wobbling since October. In 6 weeks, Vivian restructured the senior leadership team, renegotiated 2 contractor agreements that had been bleeding the company for years, and personally visited every active project site in the Chicago metro area. Marcus sent me the site visit schedule each morning, unsolicited a daily dispatch from a world I had handed over and was learning slowly and imperfectly to let run without my hands on the wheel. I arrived at the 42nd floor at 8:30 a.m., not as CEO, not as chairman in any operational sense. As Arthur Sterling founder, 61 years old, wearing his best charcoal suit and the tie Eleanor had given him for their 25th anniversary, because today was the kind of day that deserved the right tie. Marcus was at the elevator. He looked at the tie and nodded once, a small motion that contained, for a man of his economy of expression, quite a lot of feeling. "Phone. She's already here," he said. "Since 7. "Of course she has," I said. Robert Calloway found me near the coffee station, gripped my hand with both of his, and his voice went rough with something he clearly wasn't going to apologize for. 31 years ago, you told me we were going to build something Chicago would be proud of." His pale blue eyes had gone very bright at the corners. "She's going to take this further than either of us ever could. You know that, don't you?" My chest tightened in the best possible way, the kind that has nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with a moment exceeding what you planned for it. "I'm counting on it," I said. "At 9 a.m. Marcus stepped forward and said simply, "I'd like to introduce your new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Property, Vivian Cole." She walked in and the room responded the way rooms respond to people who have been quietly earning their place for years and are finally standing in it, not with noise but with the full-body attention of 200 people who have already made up their minds. Deep navy suit, dark hair down. She moved to the front with the kind of forward momentum that doesn't announce itself but simply occupies space completely. She looked at the room. She looked at me briefly in the third row. Something moved across her face so fast, most people would have missed it. I didn't miss it. I had been reading that face for 28 years. The past 6 weeks have been genuinely hard. She said, her voice clear and warm, carrying the faintest thread of something that was the honest cousin of a tremor. "There was uncertainty about this company's future, and I am not going to pretend that wasn't real." She paused, steadier now, finding her footing. "But this company's future is not uncertain anymore. We have a plan, we have financing, and we have something more important than both 31 years of reputation that no one can take from us. That belongs to every person in this room." Robert Calloway pressed his fist against his mouth. His shoulders shook slightly. My own eyes were burning badly enough that I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed through it deliberately. When the applause finally settled, Vivian came directly to me, didn't stop for anyone else first, which was the kind of detail I would never forget. Her eyes were very bright. Her jaw was set in the way that meant she was holding herself together through willpower alone. "Well," she said. "You were magnificent," I said, and my voice came out completely wrecked, rough and low, and full of 32 years of something I still don't have a word for. She laughed, half sound, half something else, and put her arms around me right there in front of 200 people without a trace of self-consciousness. I held on to my daughter with both arms and did not try to be composed about it. "Thank you, Dad," she said, muffled against my shoulder. "For all of it." "Thank you," I said back, "for being exactly who you are." 6 feet away, Marcus turned deliberately toward the north window. His hand came up briefly to his face. I decided not to mention it. The suitcase was still in the front closet. I had not touched it since October, not because I feared what I would feel, but because I was waiting to feel the right thing. On the afternoon of December 15th, February 15th, after the morning, I had stood at O'Hare and discovered that my son had decided to use my own luggage against me. I finally opened that closet, pulled the bag out, and carried it to the kitchen table. Italian leather, dark burgundy. Eleanor had chosen it. She had an eye for things built honestly and meant to hold. I unzipped it and looked inside. Empty. Clean. Whatever Julian had placed in it was long since catalogued by Raymond's team, filed as evidence in a federal case building quietly toward its conclusion 12 blocks away. But I needed to open it. I needed to see it in good light for exactly what it was, a well-made object that had survived being used against its purpose and was still fundamentally itself. I zipped it back up and put it at the foot of the bed where it belonged. Then I made coffee, settled into the armchair by the living room window, and called Vivian. She picked up on the second ring the way she always did. "How was your day?" I asked. "Long," she said, and I could hear the smile in it. We closed the Evanston refinancing at 3. Robert Calloway cried actual tears and was completely unapologetic about it. Marcus brought a cake with the company logo in blue frosting. I laughed genuinely, the kind that surprised me with its own ease. "He's been doing that since 2009. "I know." Her voice softened. "He told me about the cake after Mom passed, how he brought one to the office because he didn't know what else to do, and everyone just sat together and talked about her." My throat tightened. The December light through the window was low and amber, the kind that makes everything look like a memory while you're still living inside it. "Lemon cake," I said roughly. "March 2019. She would have found it completely absurd and also exactly right. She would have," Vivian said, warm and certain. We talked without urgency about her new hire, who had pushed back on 3 of Vivian's assumptions in a 30-minute interview and been offered the job on the spot. About Raymond's call that morning, the grand jury and its final phase news expected in January. "How are you feeling about it?" she asked. "Grateful," I said honestly. "Profoundly in my bones grateful. 31 years of building something honest turned out to be the only plan I ever needed." Her voice, when it came back, was not entirely steady. "I love you, Dad." Just plainly. No reason attached. My eyes went hot. I pressed the back of my hand against them and held it there, not hiding, just holding. "I love you too," I said. "I have since the Tuesday afternoon you arrived in my office and changed everything without knowing it." After we hung up, I sent one last text. The Evanston refinancing. Eleanor would have loved that one. She always liked Evanston. Her response came back in under 30 seconds. No punctuation. "Perfectly her. Then we'll dedicate it to her." I set the phone down. Outside, Chicago went on doing what it always had, building, rebuilding, making room for whatever came next. I was 61 years old. I had a company in better hands than mine, a house that had been broken into and was still standing, a gouge in my desk I had decided to keep, and a daughter who answered on the second ring. That was enough. That was in fact everything. People ask me sometimes how I got through it. An old man, 61 years old, watching everything he built nearly come apart at the seams, and still choosing strategy over rage, patience over panic. Honestly, I don't have a clever answer for that. What I have is this: somewhere in the middle of those sleepless nights in Paris, I remembered something my mother used to say when I was a boy. "Arthur, God doesn't give you the storm to break you. He gives it to you so you find out what you're actually made of." I'm not a man who talks about faith often, but I held on to that sentence like a handhold on a very dark climb, and I am not ashamed to say so. Here is what I learned the hard way. The only way that actually sticks. I gave my son everything except the one thing that would have saved him the experience of earning it. Don't be like me in that. Love your children fiercely, but let them build their own calluses. A person who has never carried weight doesn't know how to stand when the weight arrives. And this is my personal conviction, for whatever it is worth coming from an old man in a Lincoln Park armchair legacy is not what you leave behind. It's who you raise up to carry it forward. Vivian didn't inherit sterling property. She earned it. That distinction is everything. These are grandpa stories that don't end neatly. Real family story rarely does. But if this grandpa story's found you at the right moment, If something in this family story made you think about your own people, your own choices, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what would you have done differently. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe because there is more coming, and the next ones go even deeper. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very last word. It means more than you know. One final note. The stories ahead contain some fictionalized elements constructed entirely for storytelling and reflection. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all, step away and find what serves you better. But if you're staying, I'm glad you're here. This family story is just getting started.